All right, let's begin. So here, exercise 3J, percentage change notes. Last session, I showed you only two key skills. If you want to change something to a percentage, let's say fractions or decimals, to a percentage, you just times by 100. So as long as you have 100 of them, right? Whereas if it's the other way around, if you're trying to change percentages to fractions or decimals, then it's the opposite of that. So you then work backwards and you say, well, what if I divide it by 100? Okay, instead of times it by 100, instead of having 100 of them, I only need one of them. Yeah? So those are the only two skills for 3G, 3H, and today 3J. Let's have a look at what percentage change is. Now, Gary buys a ticket to a concert for $90, so we know that they're buying it. They've initially started off with $90, so initially $90. And then, because they can't go, or they couldn't go, they then sell it to a friend for $72. So the initial amount, they start off with $90. That's how much they spent. And then the final amount, they ended up with $72. Okay? The question is asking not what the loss was, because we can figure out the loss. Okay, that's what the change means. What is the loss, though? If I want to work out the change, which is the loss, how much was the loss? Yes, Kyle? $18. But what a lot of students do here, which I want you to be mindful of why I wrote initial and final, is a lot of students take the bigger number and subtract the smaller number. In this scenario, it's easy to do in your head and you know the answers. But in a long term, let's say over a year's time, it does matter what's in between and what your final amount is. Okay, that's what accounting is for. So accounting has that minus and plus scenarios, and then you have to know what's coming in, what's coming out. So to sort of teach you the order, I wrote initial because when you're trying to find change, how do you know it's a loss? Well, we work out the change by doing final, so what you end up at the end of the day, minus what you started off at the start of the day. Okay, so it's not always the large number minus the small number. In this case, my final amount is what? Can I please have, let's go with Josh. What's my final amount? Because I'm doing final minus initial, so what's my final amount? Not 70. 72. So final amount, $72. Yeah, it's right in front of you. So $72, take away your initial amount. What's my initial amount in this case? Let's go with $90. And the reason why I want it into this particular order is because 72 take away 90 is actually equal to not just 18, it is negative 18. And the negative is key because negative then tells you it's a loss. I know the question tells you a loss, but later on they don't tell you that and you have to figure it out yourself, right? And you got to prove it. How do you prove that mathematically it is a loss? Well, your final amount is what you ended up with. You started off with 90, so it makes sense you ended up with less than what you started. So hence it should be negative. Now the question wasn't asking for how much did you lose. We know we lost $18. But on a business point of view, when you have such a large company, you're not interested in the one transaction. You're interested in the overall yearly profits or loss. So what they're interested in normally is they're asking for the percentage. Did we make a profit this year? Was it 30% gain, 20% gain? They're not interested in the dollar amount. So how do you change this dollar amount to $18 that you're losing? How do you change that to a percentage? You first need a proportion. So we've got negative 18, which is the change. Now last session, I taught you how to change it into a percentage, but you need a proportion first. Is it out of 90 or is it out of 72? Which one is it? 90 or 72? 90. It's always what you started off with. It's not what your future is. Yeah, so it's negative not 18 over 90, which is what you began with. We want to know what the proportion is. Now that you got your proportion, Will, please don't speak while I'm speaking. Okay. You got negative 18 on 90. Your goal is to convert this to a percentage. How do you convert it to a percentage, which I already have up here? Only two things that you learn. To change anything to a percentage, you then just multiply by 100. That's it. This is the only skill you're doing in exercise 3J. So 3J, if you look at the formula, it was find the change, divided by what you started off with, times by 100. That's it. But to set it up and to write your answers, that's what I'm more interested in. I'm interested in your logical thinking, not just the answer. Now, up to this point, if you are struggling with the fractions component, like multiplying by 100 and simplifying, you can use a calculator, but I still encourage that you work on these kind of fractions because that's exercise 3B. Chapter 3, exercise 3B and 3C is your core for chapter 3, and that's how I know if you know your fractions. So by the end of this term, if I ask, how are you doing with chapter 3? This is what I'm really looking at. Can you add, subtract, multiply, or divide fractions? And that's why that skill, if you avoid it now, you can get by, you get the theory, but it will come back later on if you don't know how to do your fractions. Yeah. So this is your time to sort of practice if you're not strong with that. Okay. Let's have a look. Your goal is to multiply. Again, we can change 100 to a fraction, so we write it as 100 over 1. Now, when you multiply fractions, we say top with top, bottom with bottom. But if you do that, the numbers are really big. So your goal is to make them smaller first. Now, I can see two numbers already that I can make smaller. Which two numbers can you see? Hands up if you can see it. Sully.
90 and 100.
Yeah, 90 and 100. They both share a 0. Now, if they share a 0, it is a factor of 10. Very good. So let's reduce that first. Let's change it. We know if you have a 0, then we know a factor of 10 should fit nicely. So how many 10s in 100? Let's go with Elliot. 10. Very good. So there are 10 10s in 100. And how many 10s in 90? 9. Beautiful. So this changes your fraction now to negative 18 on 9 multiplied by 10 on 1, which is much better than the initial problem. Now you can still do top with top, bottom and bottom, but I still can see there's two more numbers that I can simplify. Which two can you see? Hands up. Which are the two? Leon.
Is it 18 and 9?
18 and 9. 18 and 9 have a common factor of what? 9. Very good.
1 and 2.
So 9 and 9, that's very good. So 9 goes 18 twice. So negative 2 over 1. Very good. So this becomes 2. This becomes 1. And we still have times 10 over 1. Now that's a much better fraction to work with than the very first one. Now let's multiply top with top, bottom with bottom, and you should get negative 20 over 1, which is negative 20. Now you don't finish off your answers negative 20%, because that's what we were looking for. We're looking for a proportion as a percentage times by 100. There's my negative 20%. So if you were in a business setting, you would then say, this year we had, you don't say negative 20%, but that negative implies you had a 20% loss. Okay, if it was a positive, then you can say it's a 20% gain or profit. And that's what business is always looking for. They're always looking for a gain and how they can improve that whilst reducing the cost. So usually would be buy things for cheaper. For example, in America, why a lot of things are sort of exported into or manufactured in China is to reduce the cost. If it reduces the cost, you can still sell for higher and you get a larger margin profit. Okay? All right, so that's first example 1. Let's go for example 2 now. This is question 7. Estelle purchased a piece of sporting memorabilia for $120. So we got an initial amount and we got a final amount. Bought it for $120, but 20 years later, it was sold for $900. So, Tilly, what was the starting or initial and the final amount? Good.
And then you sold it for $900.
So that's the final amount. What is the change? Change, when we're calculating it, we take final minus initial, which is, ooh, close. It's 900 take away 120. Now if you think about it, 900 take 100 is already 800. Take another 20, 780. Very good. Notice it's a positive number. That means, and it makes sense because you ended up with a larger number than what you started off with. So it has to be a profit. So this clearly is a profit. And the question kind of alluded to it. Let's say percentage profit. Yeah? You've got $780, but we're not interested in the change. We know it's a $780 profit, but we want to know what is that as a percentage. So to work it out as percentage, you need a proportion. Can you write this as a proportion for me? Let's go with Tom. $780 out of what?
Out of 900.
No. See what I said? So this is a very common one. A lot of students will pick and choose. Always start off with what you have. You have 120. The 900 is a future thing. Yeah, so it's actually 780 out of 120. That's a common mistake. And I say it all the time. Every year I say the same thing and it comes to a test. Students do that. There's something about it that the 900, they do a 50-50 guess. So I'll get half of you will get it right and then half of you will pick wrong. Yeah, it's always what you had in your pocket. So we've got $120 in your pocket. It's actually 780 over 120. That's what you started off with. Now we're going to look at the change. So we're going to convert it to a percentage and you do that by? Times by 100. That's it. You can do that on a calculator, but I encourage you to practice your fractions. So at this point, write it as a fraction, 100 over 1. Let's see. What two numbers can you already see that can be simplified? Yes, Sully?
120 and 100.
Yes, they both have a 0. If they both have a 0, what factor?
20.
Oh, 20 is even better, yeah. But if you didn't know it was 20, if there's a 0, you can divide by 10 to begin with. But yes, 20 is probably a better number. Okay, I'm going to do 10 first for the majority if they didn't see 20. So how many 10s in 120? 12. How many 10s in 100? 10. So we rewrite the fraction. It's 780 over 12 times 10 over 1. We can simplify this even further. Which two numbers? 12 and 10. What numbers? 2, so we can halve it. That makes this a 5. This makes this a 6. And let's just block that out. That still gives me now what? 780 over 6 times 5 over 1. I can still see another factor. Not an obvious one, but there is another factor. Which one? Will.
780 and 6.
And what's the common factor?
6.
Very good. Now that's not common. So that's why in this step here, what I might have done is I would have reduced the 780 and the 12 because any large numbers you keep makes it harder to simplify later. Okay, so if you simplify big numbers first, like 120 and 780 rather than 120 and 100, it makes it more obvious to see. Okay, if you go for the easy ones first, you could end up with a very large one and you might not realize. Okay, but yes, how many 6 fits into 780? 130 is correct. And then 6 into 6 is 1. So you're really just working out.
130 times 5.
Very good. 650 is the correct answer. Now it's 650 what? Percent. Very good. Okay, if you don't put in the percent, I'll mark you wrong. So it makes sense. Then when you ask, what was the percentage gain? Well, you went from 120 to 900. 650 sounds about right. Yeah? Whereas if you actually did 780 over 900, watch what happens. And it makes a lot of sense. It doesn't work. Had you done it the other way around, if you did 780 over 900 and you times it by 100, watch what happens. Already, that's less than 1. So there's no way you're going to make more than 100% gain here. That's only 86%. But how does that make sense? You start off with 120, you're more than double. If you're more than doubled, shouldn't it be like 200% and above? Why is it less than 100%? Doesn't make sense. So when you get your numbers, you should think about, does the mathematics make sense? Yeah, so that 900 is probably because that's a future thing. This is what you currently got is the profit out of what you began. That's why we do it out of initial, not your final. Okay? That's it for today's lesson. That is exercise 3J, links back to 3G, 3H. 2 examples to show you a profit versus a loss. Change, final minus initial, converting to fractions, to percentages, sorry. Got to work with your fractions there. If you're not strong with your fractions yet, you can use a calculator. But I encourage you to work on your fractions. Yeah? All right, we go.